Thank you very much. Let me start, Excellency Ambassador, to stand with you 31 years later to commemorate the genocide. And all of us who are present here must note the clarion call. It is remember, unite, and renew. And when we talk about African solutions to African problems in the context of the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, we must always remind ourselves that the so-called international institutions were created without Africa. Number two, when we make certain statements, some of which I will make, the apologists for genocide and other inhuman activities are always quick to remind Africans that that is history and it is in the past. It is not. The problems that we have in Africa today are partly, and I dare say, largely a byproduct of the partition of Africa in 1884 and 1885 in Berlin, Germany. And I want to remind us that when the United Nations Charter came into force in 1945 in San Francisco, Africans were not there. When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came into force in 1948 in Paris, Africans were not there. And that is why you see the architecture of the so-called international instruments are insensitive to African problems. And I dare say that we must always be reminded that classical colonialism may have died, but neocolonialism is alive and well. It manifests itself in different institutions which are post-colonial. For the British countries, it manifests itself in an organization called the Commonwealth, whose head will always be the British monarch. For former French colonies, it manifests itself in an organization called La Francophonie, based in Paris. For the former Portuguese colonies, it manifests itself in the community of Portuguese-speaking countries. These are uncomfortable truths which the colonialists never want to hear, but we must remind them at all times. That is why when you go to the UN, you will find that all African countries can vote all they want, but it takes a veto vote from France to neutralize all that. A veto vote from the UK to neutralize all that. Until the day that we wake up to that reality, we are going nowhere. And I want to tell the Rwandans that when the genocide took place and the international community was silent, for a period of 31 years, they were laboring under guilt. They now believe that time has healed that guilt. That is why the sanctions are now coming. It is payback time. You made us feel guilty. We must now pay back. That is how the Belgians are so brazen that when they are invited to the Democratic Republic of Congo, they are coming back again. And they were the authors of the problem. They were the ones who were measuring the size of people's noses. That is the reality. And we in the African continent, unfortunately, are also laboring under inferiority complex, which was inculcated into us through the colonial project. We are the only continent in the world that still refers to ourselves as Anglophone, to mean that we are English-speaking. Francophone, to mean that we are French-speaking. Lusophone, to mean that we are Portuguese-speaking. That is how pathetic our attitude towards ourselves is. And I'm suggesting to us that until the day that we mentally liberate ourselves, we are never going to solve our problems. When you tell the Rwandese, the Tutsi in Congo that they are not Congolese, who are they? Who are they? They are Congolese. What made them Congolese was that somebody sat in Berlin and drew a line and created Belgian Congo. When you tell, as Julius Nyerere said, when you are telling them to go, are you also telling them to go with the land? These are the realities. And I want us to remember, we Africans and our friends of goodwill, that the international, so-called international architecture is still psychologically, ideologically, and philosophically arrayed against the continent of Africa. The joy of Europe, unspoken, is an Africa that is disorganized, at war, and that does not function. It is only us who can save ourselves by ensuring that we begin to provide solutions to our own problems. When ICTR in Rwanda was going through the mechanics of trying the perpetrators of the genocide, they were spending money in the billions without solving the problems. It took the administration of the RPF in Rwanda to come up with a gashasha to solve the problem. But we don't see that being reported. No, it is ICTR. Rwanda demonstrated to the world that we can do it ourselves. Right now, we have an organization called the African Union. Its greatest claim to fame is that it is funded externally, funded by European NGOs, funded by European governments, and lately the Chinese. The old English saying is true: he or she who pays the piper calls the tune. As long as we are being funded, we will never be independent. And I'm suggesting that the AU must step up. How can it be that African problems are mediated in Qatar? How can it be that African problems are mediated in Istanbul? How can it be that African problems are mediated in Paris and in Munich? These are the painful questions that we must ask. East African community, as I speak now, is crumbling. There is war in Sudan, war threatened in South Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Somalia. And yet we hear that when the chips are down, some of our leaders call Macron. How can a slave call a former slave master to tell him or her how to get out of slavery? We are our own source of problems. And the time is now that we in the African continent must ask ourselves what we can do. I'll not belabor the issue. I'll conclude in 3 minutes. We must ask ourselves, what are our institutions doing? How can it be that in the DRC problem, Luanda starts a process. Nairobi starts a process. We meet in Dar es Salaam. We disagree. The president of Angola withdraws. The Kenyans are talking at cross purposes. The EAC and SADC cannot agree. And one day we see our president sitting in Qatar. How can it be? How can it be? How can it be that the chairman of the AUC, what he does is to issue some sterile pro forma statements and does not send a serious mission into the heart of Kinshasa? How can it be that nobody is condemning the invitation of Belgium, a former colonizer, to come and kill Africans again after King Leopold of the Belgians killed 15 million? How can it be? So, ladies and gentlemen, until the day that we of the African extraction remember that the interest of the conceptual West and other players too is to do what is in their best interest. Today, when you listen to any international media, whether it's Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, CGTN, Sky TV, TV France, or the BBC, or the CNN, DRC occupies less than 30 minutes, 30 seconds rather. Sometimes even when they are dealing with the weather, there is no weather in Africa. They don't talk about weather in Africa. If you don't define yourself, you'll be defined by others. So in conclusion, what am I suggesting? I'm suggesting that what was experienced in Rwanda should be a lesson to the entire continent of Africa. As we speak now, we know, and my good friend talked about those who are denying genocide. There are people, and I've been at forums where there are people talking about revisiting what happened in Rwanda with a view to concluding what they started. What are we doing about it? What are we doing as regional communities, EAC and SADC, to ensure that we fund our affairs? What are we doing about international justice? Why is it that the ICC does not see Europeans and Americans who have caused deaths in the Middle East, whatever the Middle East is? I've always wondered, why is it Middle East? There is no Northeast or Southeast. Who created it? But the truth is, ICC is created, and somebody has said it is for Africans. That is why you can have a warrant of arrest against anybody else. They'll not be arrested. It's against weak countries. At least Philippines falls in that category. Their former president is there. Can't we have an African body that is functional? There is one in Arusha, but is weak, and Morocco has just withdrawn from it. What are we doing about it? In the area of justice, we must go in the direction of solving our problems. Number 3, what are we doing to ensure that the next generation of Africans are taught about these things? Are we teaching about EAC, about SADC, about ECOWAS, about the Sahel, about the Horn and the Maghreb in our schools? What are we teaching about history in our schools? When we talk about genocide, what is the AU doing about it? Or is about meetings and conferences and workshops and symposia sponsored by European NGOs? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you what you know. Wisdom requires that I do not belabor the issue. The concluding remark is that we Africans must now ensure that we begin to de-emphasize the Berlin boundaries. My good friend, the former foreign minister of Tanzania, Palamagambo Kabudi, at a conference told Tanzanians, tell me, in which African border do we not have the Maasai in Kenya and in Tanzania? Where do we not have the Wahaya in Tanzania and in Kenya? Where do we not have the people, the Wanyamwezi in Mozambique and in other parts of Africa? That is the reality of Africa. We must not give practical meaning to the partition of Africa. We must not give meaning to the British model of colonization, divide and rule. We must not give meaning to the French method of rule of assimilation. We must not give meaning to the Portuguese style of destroying our psyche and building the mulattoes to lord it over others. Fellow Africans and friends of goodwill here, until the day that we wake up and begin to do things ourselves, we are going nowhere. Others are beginning to do it. Go to Asia now, like them or hate them. The Chinese are doing their things. Like them or hate them, the Indonesians are doing their things. Like them or hate them, the Vietnamese are doing their things. Like them or hate them, the Indians are doing their things. Like them or hate them, the Brazilians are doing their things. The time is now for us to do our things. Only then will we be at the dinner table of civilization and humanity, not as waiters, but as diners. God bless you.